Hi. Uh, my apology for looking like a pilot, but this is the only way for me to make sure that the sound recording is clear and monotonous throughout the entire presentation. I would like to open up um, by thanking the Galicia Jewish Museum for sponsoring the event, to the organizers, especially to Bartok for inviting me to participate in the Israeli Days in Krakow Association's project for 2020. This is the third time I participate in this project. The first time I was a junior research fellow at the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. The second time I was a senior research fellow, and now I am the head of the center. Unlike previous times, this is the first time we are holding this presentation via a Zoom recording. But despite the difference and the distance, it is always a pleasure, and I am truly grateful for this opportunity. Preparing for the presentation today, I was going over headlines from international media outlets in order to characterize the Iranian-Israeli conflict of recent years. And there are so many different aspects, even from recent days alone, that we can say that conflict is conducted through several fronts at the same time. From the outset, it is important to note that Iran and Israel do not share common borders. They have never fought each other in a war and have no territorial claims on each other's land. Now we can see that they are also very distant from one another. Almost 2,000 kilometers separates Iran and Israel. In terms of the territory and geography, Israel is about 22,000 square kilometers, and Iran is almost 1.6 million square kilometers. Despite this distance, over the last 4 decades, Israel and Iran have been engaged in a low-intensity conflict. Iran has been accused of sponsoring terrorist attacks against Jewish and Israeli targets around the world. Israel is alleged to have assassinated several Iranian nuclear scientists and to have been the main force, along with the United States, behind the Stuxnet virus at Iran's nuclear facilities. The list of associations and accusations is, of course, much longer, and neither side has ever acknowledged carrying out many of these alleged attacks. Now, I've already mentioned that this low-intensity conflict has been carried out in several and different fronts, and that means both virtual and non-virtual spheres or fronts. In terms of the most direct confrontation in the relations between Iran and Israel in recent years, we can relate to their position in Syria, Israel opposition to Iranian entrenchment in Syria and in Lebanon is twofold: to prevent Iran from building beachhead against Israel through its proxies on Israeli borders, and to impede development of Iran's nuclear and long-range missiles capabilities. In the past few weeks, a series of airstrikes attributed to Israel have targeted a number of targets throughout Syria connected to Iran, or Iran-backed militias, and the Lebanese Hezbollah. In the case of Iran, it draws on a on defense policies based on the perception of the country's geography, and also lessons learned from recent wars in the Middle East and elsewhere. Being a Shiite nation, Iran is a minority in its region. It is surrounded by the United States and its allies who enjoy massive military and economic resources. Within this context, Tehran's defense strategy is based on two fundamental resources or notions, asymmetrical warfare and forward defense doctrine. This combination explained the key role Syria and Hezbollah and other militia, for example, in Iraq and in Yemen, play in Iran's national security. According to Godat Bagdat, an expert of national security and defense in Washington, Iran has learned from the Cold War geopolitical lessons. This includes the view that Soviet Union collapsed partly because it engaged in an arms race with the United States and its economy could not afford this conflict. And this contributed in turn to its eventual demise. Considering this outcome, asymmetrical warfare strategy was meant, again, from Iranian perspective, to compensate for their economic disadvantages. And of course, under the economic sanctions, international sanctions, this disadvantages only augment. Now, further along with the Iranian perspective, we could hear in the past week, the Iranian parliament approved a bill, including a list of measures against the state of Israel. The chairman of the Iranian Parliament National Security and Foreign Policy Commission, Mujtaba Zunur, was quoted saying, and I quote, "During 7 decades of its formation, the Zionist regime has created numerous difficulties for the Muslims in the region. Spying, terrorism, and martyrdom of Iranian nuclear scientists, cyber and electronic warfare, and cyber attacks on nuclear and economic centers are among the Zionist regime's actions against Iran." Going back to the Israeli perspective, then I can say that leading clerics headed by the country's spiritual leader, Ali Khamenei, continue to endorse Holocaust denial literature publicly. Perhaps the highest moment of these war of minds or war of words came out in 2005, 2006, under the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who made many statements against what is called in Iran the Zionist regime. Back then, he participated in a conference titled "The World Without Zionism," where he said, and I quote, "The Imam said this regime occupying Jerusalem must vanish from the page of time." These controversial statements, along with other threatening remarks made by the president, were supported again by statements and declarations and speeches and sermons by the spiritual leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, who once said that Israel is a cancer tumor in the body of Islam. These statements join rallies and annual celebrations of the anniversary for the establishment of the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Revolution in 1979, which include the burning of the Israeli flag and chanting all sorts of hostile phrases like death to America or down with Israel. In addition to that, in recent days, before, sorry, before the later example, I want to relate to this example and say that in January 15, 2019, brought international media attention of the Warsaw Conference in February that year, ignited Iranian reactions in the hardline media. In one caricature in particular, which was published by the news agency Tasnim, related with the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, we can see a Saudi lizard and an Israeli rat conniving in a dark cave against the reciprocated target, which is the Iranian lion. Now, I brought this example because despite the persistence of officials and some scholars claiming that Iran distinguishes between Zionism and Judaism and that its rhetoric is merely anti-Zionist and forms part of the needed assistance for the Palestinians and therefore legitimate, visual and verbal expressions such as the one I showed so far, and these are just several examples, these are embedded in classic anti-Semitic motives, and they many times dehumanize and demonize the Jews as a whole, not just Zionists, and often they conflate both anti-Semitic motives and anti-Jewish motives, anti-Zionist motives. And there are those who argue that anti-Israelism is the new and modern anti-Semitism. The most recent example is from May 22nd, when the spiritual leader of Iran, Khamenei, posted on his website and also on his Twitter account this illustration, which captures the alleged or imaginative conquest of Jerusalem by all sorts of pro-Iranian forces. And the headline and title of this illustration included the phrase of the final solution, which is very sensitive and ignites all kinds of connotations from World War II in Jewish imagination. Now, having said that, it is important to note that during the years of the Pahlavi monarchy, and especially in the 1960s and early 1970s, the two countries, Iran and Israel, had close ties and even maintained a strategic alliance. Although relations were never formal, they gradually developed into what one Iranian official at the time termed as love relations without a marriage contract. Iran is a Shiite and Persian state in a region predominantly Sunni and largely Arab, with a history rich in hostility to its Arab and non-Arab Muslim neighbors. As a result, while seeking close ties with the West and striving for social and economic reforms, the Shah, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, viewed Israel as a natural ally. The strength of Israel and its progress in the fields of technology, agriculture, medicine, and its military capabilities and accomplishments seem to have fascinated him in the 1960s, further encouraging the strengthening of the ties between the two countries. The Shah also seemed to believe that through his ties with Israel, Iran would benefit in Washington and gain the support of American Jewry, of the Congress, the media, the business community, and of course, the American administration. Israel, on its part, at that time in the 1950s and 1960s, was searching for legitimacy in the Muslim world, and it viewed Iran as an ideal ally. Its first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, developed the concept of peripheral states. According to this theory, if Israel had no relations with its immediate neighbors, it should seek the friendship of the neighbors of the neighbor. Iran, on its part, felt threatened by its neighbors, some of whom, like Arab nationalist Egypt and Ba'athist Iraq, presented it with serious challenges. Consequently, close ties developed between Israel and Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia, the countries on Israel's periphery. Iran was viewed by Israel as an especially important country in the region due to its strategic location, its size, and economic potential. It was also a Muslim, not an Arab state, and it seemed to have no reason for conflict with Israel. Now, I've mentioned that these relations way we conceive diplomatic relations in nowadays. It is also important to indicate for the record that in 1947, when the United Nations held a vote to split the Palestinian region into Israel and Palestine, at the time, Iran was one of the 13 countries to reject the proposal. Once the Israeli state was established, Iran objected to its admission into the UN. However, this soon has changed, and Iran became one of the first Muslim majority states to unofficially recognize Israel's sovereignty in 1950. So again, despite the rough start between the two countries and lack of recognition, once Iran has recognized Israel's legitimacy for its sovereignty, the relationship between the two countries developed in many fields: technology, science, agriculture, etc. But this period of close ties came to an abrupt end with the formation of the Islamic Republic, following the Islamic Revolution in 1979. Among the countries found blameworthy by the Iranian revolutionary movement, Israel, in addition to the United States, was indicated on more counts than any other state. According to Iranian Israeli scholar David Menashri, while Iran gradually renewed ties with most countries, its attitudes toward Israel has not yet changed. Moreover, Menashri indicates, Iran's Islamic arguments have put the Arab-Israeli conflict on a totally different footing. A religious crusade as opposed to the previous political national conflict. Iran's involvement in Lebanon and its moral, political, and logistical support for Islamist movements like the Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad made it more directly involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict than before. Its attempts, whether actual or alleged, to purchase and develop not only nuclear energy, but weapons of mass destruction, along with the missile technology to deliver them, were viewed and are still viewed as another serious challenge by Israel. And finally, and not least important, Iran's support for the anti-peace camp in the Middle East conflict added to the challenges facing the fragile process of peacemaking in the region. Iran-Israel relations, past, present, and future, cannot be detached from the Iranian-Jewish relations, and therefore my lecture will also address, at least in brief, certain aspects in Iranian Jewish history which have relevant implications to the present. And following this brief presentation regarding this particular topic, I will show that unlike the hostility and conflict projected in the headlines that govern the international media, and just a sample of them I showed in the early phase of this introduction, Iran-Israel relations are more complex and can be viewed from different perspectives. Now, if so far I've related to Iran-Israel relations, then I have to say that Iranian-Jewish relations date back to biblical times. In the year 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia conquered the city of Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and sent many of the inhabitants of Judea into exile. The Babylonian exile ended when the empire was conquered by Cyrus II of Persia and Media, who made a public declaration granting the Jews the right to return to Judea and rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. In the year 539 BCE, after uniting the Persian and Median kingdoms under his rule, King Cyrus subdued the Babylonian Empire. He founded the first Persian Empire, ruling over large areas stretching from India in the east to Egypt in the west. Shortly thereafter, in 538 BCE, King Cyrus made a public declaration, the content of which was preserved in the book of Ezra. And I quote, "In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue proclamation throughout his realm by word of mouth and in writing as follows. Thus said King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judea. Any one of you, of all his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem that is in Judea and build the house of Lord God of Israel, the God that is in Jerusalem." This is the end of quote from Book of Ezra, chapter 1. Many modern biblical researchers were very skeptical about the wording of the declaration as described in the Book of Ezra. Among other things, they claimed that it was improbable that a Persian king would have made a declaration in Hebrew or declared that he was acting as a messenger of the God of Israel. But archaeological excavations conducted in the ancient city of Babylon in 1879 discovered a clay cylinder bearing a long inscription in Akkadian. This inscription included a plea made by King Cyrus to the Babylonians, in which he declared that he had acted on behalf of the Babylonian god Marduk. I, Cyrus, king of Babylonia, Marduk, the great Lord, bless me, and I built for them a permanent temple. I gathered all their inhabitants and restored their place of residence. This archaeological discovery strengthened the view that Cyrus was sympathetic and supportive of all the peoples under his rule, and that the declaration which appeared in the Bible was an accurate reflection of history. The cylinder of Cyrus, in the foreground of an official stamp, was issued by the Israeli Post in 2015, with decorations inspired by Persian art in the background. And this is the stamp you can see here. Following the Cyrus declaration, some of the Babylon exiles returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. And this particular stamp features a coin minted in this autonomous province in the mid-4th century BCE during the Persian rule. The front of the coin is engraved with a lily, and the back is adorned with a speared winged falcon, as well as the word Yehud in ancient Hebrew letters. The coin is part of the Israel Museum collection, and it also forms part to corroborate this historical record. Now, things changed for Iranian Jews when the Muslim armies conquered Persia in the 7th century, more particularly in 642. The Islamization of Iran meant that the first Jewish golden age came to an end. It is true that for Muslims, Jews are considered people of the book, or Ahl al-Kitab. Now, in Islamic thought, those religions, Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, as well as those living outside of Iran, not only in Iran, meant to distinguish them from those whose religions are not based on divine revelations. Prophet Muhammad gave many privileges to Ahl al-Kitab that are not to be extended to heathens. Ahl al-Kitab are granted, for example, freedom of worship, and thus during the early Muslim conquest, Jews and Christians were not forced to convert to Islam and had only to pay a special tax, jizya, for their exemption from military service. Now, if I mentioned the Cyrus cylinder and his declaration, then it is important also to mention another site which holds a special importance to the connection between the Jews of Iran, Iranian Jewry, and Iran. And this is the tomb of Esther and Mordecai, which is located in the city of Hamadan in Iran. And Iranian Jews believe it houses the remains of the biblical Queen Esther and her uncle Mordecai. And it is the most important pilgrimage site for pilgrim site for Jews in Iran, and was declared a World Heritage Site by the Iranian government in 2008. In fact, in recent days, the tomb was a target of an arson attack, but fortunately, the destruction was minimal and limited to smoke damage. Although the blazing smoke made people react seriously. According to historical accounts regarding classical Persian literature, It features a number of stereotypical descriptions of Jews. Within this context, several terms are used in modern Persian to refer to Jews. There is Jehud, which carries negative connotation, and Yahud, which is less bad, but not exactly positive either. However, since the 1930s, neither of these terms has been commonly used to refer to Iranian Jews in Iran. Instead, they are called Kalimi. The word is derived from the Arabic honorific for Moses, Kalimullah, literally God's interlocutor, which alludes to the fact that Moses was the only human to whom God spoke directly. According to the research of Katajun Arimpur from the University of Hamburg, derogatory stereotypes regarding Jews can be found in the Persian language prior to the Safavid rise to power in the early 16th century, which is commonly seen as the time when things started getting difficult for Iranian Jews. The Safavids made Shi'ism the national religion of the kingdom. Shiite clergy declared Jews to be najis, ritually unclean or impure. In this regard, they shared the fate of Christians who, like the Jews, were henceforth banned from entering the homes of Muslims, for example. Jews and Christians were forced to live in specific quarters known as mahale. They were banned from leaving the house when it rained, as it was thought that they would poison the groundwater. In inheritance law, a family member who converted to Islam took precedence over Jewish descendants' children, regardless of their degree of kinship. While these rules and regulations may not actually have been followed precisely in real life and throughout the ages, they nonetheless remained, at least theoretically, in effect up to modern days. The Shiite rulers did not differentiate between Jews and Christians in their discrimination against and oppression of minorities. Bernard Lewis states as well that Persian Jewry had fallen on hard times even before the Safavids came to power. And the history of post-Safavid Iran shows that those prejudices were not limited to a radical clergy, but deeply ingrained in society. Also, the era of the Qajar dynasty, which followed the Safavids in 1779 and ruled Iran up until 1925, brought no improvement in the position of Iran's Jews. Bernard Lewis writes that compared to Jews in Iran, the Jews in the Ottoman Empire lived in paradise. Only increasing contact with Western societies, and most notably Iran's own liberal movement, at long last helped to improve the situation. The Iranian constitutionalist movement of the early 20th century was determined to create an Iranian nation in which confession would no longer matter, and being Jew or Christian or Zoroastrian would be less important than being an Iranian. Habib Levy, the Iranian author of Comprehensive History of the Jews in Iran, notes that these circumstances allowed the Jews to break the invisible chain which has bound them hand and foot for centuries. However, they did not suddenly erase the toxic impurity of anti-Semitism from people's hearts and minds. The situation of Iran's Jewish citizens finally improved with the Pahlavi Dynasty, and more specifically in the 1960s and 1970s. Reza Pahlavi, the founder of the Pahlavi Dynasty in 1926, was the first Shah, the first king, to publicly show respect for the Jewish faith by bowing to the Torah during a visit to Isfahan synagogue in the late 1920s. The process of modernization, which he forced on Iran, was designed to create an Iranian nation where religious affiliation was of no account. Yet only one decade later, in the 1930s, the new nationalism turned into radicalism. This was primarily aimed at Islam and the Arabs, but also contained strong anti-Semitic elements and a racist attitudes towards the Jews. During the 1930s, Reza Shah Pahlavi of Iran found himself drifting towards Berlin, and Italy, and it is also said that he admired Adolf Hitler, owing to his opposition to Iran's traditional enemies, namely Britain and Russia. The use of the official names for Iran's Jews, Kalimi, has its origin in this era. Reza Shah wanted to distinguish Iranian Jews from European ones, so he gave them another name. And some of the Iranian Jews themselves claimed they were Aryan Jews and thus of a different race than the Jews whom the Nazis targeted. It was said that the Iranian Jews did not mix with Semites and came from outside to Iran. This differentiation, however, did not work as well as intended. And as Kainpur further demonstrates, negative attitudes towards Jews are very prevalent in Iranian literature of that era as well. Politically, as I've already mentioned earlier, Iran's Jews enjoyed their second golden age in the 1960s due to the close ties between Iran and the West, and specifically the cordial relations that developed between the State of Israel and the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had identified the Arabs as a common foe. In that period, in the 1960s and early 1970s, Iran's Jewish community prospered economically and enjoyed cultural autonomy. While in Arab countries, Jews were expelled following the formation of Israel in 1948 and the Arab-Israeli wars, in Iran, they rose to high position in the civil service. Some scholars suggest that this point is the source of present-day anti-Semitism in Iran with its Islamist background. As early as July 1960, the Shah recognized the existence of Israel, not de jure but de facto, and pushed for cooperation between the two nations. Iran bought Israeli weapons. Israeli capital was invested in both the private and public sector in Iran. And this Israeli-Iranian cooperation was strongly attacked already in the early 1960s by the future leader of the Iranian Revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini. Starting in 1963, Khomeini had nothing but harsh criticism for the close cooperation with Israel, and he attacked the Shah as a Jew in disguise and said that he was subservient to Israel. Shortly thereafter, Khomeini was expelled from Iran. not for these words, but following prevailing attacks against the Shah and his reform program known as the White Revolution. In his exile in the Iraqi city of Najaf, Khomeini declared the West to be that fighting Israel is of vital importance in this context, as it occupies Muslim territory. The formation of the Islamic Republic of Iran following the 1979 revolution marked a dramatic turning point in the modern history of Iranian Jewry. By the time the new constitution was approved in the national referendum of December 1979, massive waves of Jews had left the country. The commercial and financial golden interlude of the Jewish socioeconomic elites came to an end with their departure, and holdings owned by them, or at least many of them, were confiscated. The nature of the community's relations with the Jewish world, most notably with Israel, also transformed drastically as the Islamic Republic consolidated its anti-American and anti-Israeli official position, turning it into an ideological baseline of its policies. However, similar to its domestic policy of tolerance towards other religious minorities, the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution guarantees Jewish Iranians certain autonomous rights, similar to those they previously had under the Pahlavi monarchy, such as freedom to practice their faith and preserve their manners. Their statutory status, nevertheless, does not preclude the government from subjecting its Jewish citizens to occasional discrimination, not only of religious dictate, but of political expediency as well. Most significantly, the formation of the Islamic Republic had a major demographic impact on the Iranian Jewry. Within 1 decade, the Jewish population in Iran dwindled by an estimated 75%. Yet exact figures are difficult to ascertain. On the one hand, the accuracy of official censuses concerning the Jewish population is questioned, primarily on account of a prevailing disinclination among local Jews to disclose their religion. On the other hand, figures presented by local Jewish organizations are questions to suggest an inflated size of the community in order to boost their own standing with the Iranian regime. Hence, although the Statistical Center of Iran estimated in 1976 their number to be 62,000, accounts indicate that from a figure of 80 to 100,000 in mid-1970s, the Jewish population in Iran declined to about 50 to 60,000 immediately after the formation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. During the war with Iraq, the Iran-Iraq War, from 1981 to 1988, the Jewish population further decreased significantly. According to Iran's Statistical Center, it had fallen to about 26,000 in 1986 and less than 13,000 in 1996. But other accounts maintain that present figures are as high as 25,000. The majority of the Jewish population immigrated to the United States, Israel, and other countries, while the remaining bulk is concentrated in the capital, Tehran. Whether we consider the overestimated figures or the lower ones, still, the Jews in Iran form the largest Jewish community in the Muslim Middle East, in addition to Turkey, Nowadays, available figure estimates that between 200 to 250,000 Jews of Iranian origin reside in Israel, and about 60 to 80,000 in the United States. In terms of their legal status, the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution explicitly addresses Iranian Jewry in conjunction with other religious minorities and implicitly refers to them in legal provisions provided for non-Muslims in general. Article 13 of the Constitution of Iran stipulates that, I don't want to get into too many details of the different articles in the Constitution, but I do want to give several, at least one or two examples in order to make the point. So Article 13 of the Constitution in Iran stipulates that Zoroastrians, Jewish, and Christian Iranians are the only recognized religious minorities. As tolerated minorities, they are free to perform within the limits of the law their religious rites and ceremonies and to act according to their tradition in matters of personal status and religious education. Some commentators point out that while Article 13 enables tolerated minorities to manifest their belief, it does not support freedom of belief for all Iranians, nor does it guarantee minorities equal treatment by the judicial system. And to this effect, Iranian Jews maintain reluctance to speak of it for fear for reprisal. Article 14 of the Constitution also affirms that non-Muslims will not be treated in accordance, will be treated in accordance with Islamic virtue and justice, and with respect to human rights, as long as they are not involved in any sort of anti-Islamic activities or plot against the Islamic Republic of Iran. In practice, the ruling authorities are giving a wide legal leeway in determining what constitutes an act against Islam and against the state, especially under cloaked accusations of connections with Israel. I would also say that in December 2003, a potent and important constitutional amendment in the statutory status of non-Muslims in Iran was ratified by the parliament concerning the parity of blood money between Muslim and non-Muslim Iranian nationals. Prior to this revision, the Iranian Penal Code stated that reparation for a non-Muslim male victim who was a member of a religious minority was half of the compensation offered to the family of a Muslim male victim. This modification was one of the achievements of the reformist-minded Majlis of 2004, but it was not sufficient per se to mitigate the judiciary bias and severe treatment of local members of the religious minorities and of the Jewish Iranians in particular. The most notable feature of the Islamic Republic of Iran's commitment to integrate religious minorities into the revolutionary system is reflected in Article 64 of the Constitution. Similar to the first constitution in Iran from 1906, and the civil code of the Pahlavi monarchies, this article guarantees the Jewish community one reserved seat in parliament. of the 270 deputies of the Islamic Consultative Assembly, and as of 2000, there are 290 members. Five legislators are members of the recognized minorities. That means that there are two members who has reserved seats from the Christian minority community, one from the Jewish community, and two from the Zoroastrians. In terms of community life, under the Islamic Republic of Iran, all the affairs of the Jewish population are regulated by three principal authorities: the Jewish Religious Authority, or the Chief Rabbi, the Board of Directors of the Teheran Jewish Committee, and the Office of the Jewish Legislator in the Parliament. The Teheran Jewish Committee is partly funded by the state, and its activities are closely monitored by the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance and the Organization of Endowments and Charity Works. The Teheran Committee is also active in coordination with the communities around Iran, and associates itself with other cities, and even issue and publish a monthly journal which is called Ofuk Bina, Insightful Horizon. The journal is defined as a cultural, social, and news publication, and its editorial staff is exclusively Jewish, although the publication is open to contributions by non-Jewish writers as well. For summation, I would like to address the final part or section of my presentation to individual initiatives in Israel and in Iran in the past 2 decades. If I started this presentation with a lot of examples for the hostility and the conflict between the two countries, then here I would like to show another side and another perspective of these relations, and it's mostly by non-state organizations or individuals. So, having said that, in 2008, an Iranian street artist teamed up with an Israeli artist and created a series of works that were called Evolution of Violence, and it was to be showcased on the street walls of Tel Aviv and Tehran at the same time. Although the series was not developed further, these drawings on the walls in both cities were displayed for a while and shown also online through social media. Not connected with these initiatives, but in a trilingual message that was sprayed in 2012 in the city of Shiraz, there was a call saying no to war. 2012 witnessed several very, very interesting projects. On March 14, an Israeli couple named Roni Edri and Michal Tamir, together with a small preparatory school for graphic design students, uploaded to Facebook posters depicting images of themselves with their children and family members, alongside the words, "Iranians, we will never bomb your country, we love you." In a very short while, the page was liked by more than 100 100,000 people. And it was followed by a video that was posted on YouTube in March 2012 with similar messages of Iranians, we love you, showing Israelis classes, and it was viewed in just one day, one single day, 40,000 times. Now here we have another example of We Love You page on Facebook of the community, and we can see Iranians and Israelis smiling together and showing their passports. Around the same time, another initiative in the University of Haifa launched the project TETEL, the acronym of Tehran, Haifa, Tel Aviv, with the hope of opening a direct and apolitical bridge between Israelis and Iranians. Also in 2012, the Israeli-Iranian pop star diva, sorry about that, Rita, released her album All My Joys in Persian. Shortly after the songs were uploaded online, her album won an underground fan base in Iran. In June 2012, the Iranian-Israeli singer Hezi Faniyan released a single in Persian titled Salam, sending peace to the Iranian people. And also in the music scene was the reported fan base of the Israeli psytrance electronic duo Infected Mushrooms. The duo was formed in Haifa in 1996 and considered back then one of the best-selling groups in Israeli music history in terms of its domestic and international sales. In December 2012, a group of Iranians recorded themselves driving on a highway in Tehran as they listened to dance to the Infected Mushrooms band music. Now, beyond everything that I said so far, because I was asked about it in your questions about the Iranian Jews in Israel, then I've already mentioned that according to estimations, there are between 200 to 250,000 Jews of Iranian origins living in Israel, and they have a thriving cultural scene. There are a radio station that broadcast in Persian and Persian music and discuss Persian culture. There are a lot of groups that are very active on Facebook and other social media. There used to be broadcast of the Jews of Iran broadcasting in Israel that used to broadcast both on Facebook and YouTube. Beyond that, Israelis are connected with the Iranian culture in their everyday routine. When they go to the supermarket, for example, we have the Persian rice and Persian tea, and we know the Persian cat. Also known are the Iranian Persian miniatures, and of course we have the Persian, sorry about that again, the Persian rugs. And I can say, at least for myself, that the Prince of Persia was my first video game. So this is also something that connects us with the Persian culture or heritage, or show a different perspective about this relations. I can say that in trying to show different perspective of this relations, this was just a small sample of an entire semester that can cover this relations, but I hope I was able to at least show you glimpses into the complexity of these relations, and to show that throughout the ages, these relations were going through a lot of ups and downs, and hopefully this will be able to be resolved in the future. And although it may not be as simple as one may think, Iran have a history of avoiding competition with rivals from Israel since the Athens 2004 Olympic Games. The Iranian regime pressured Iranians competitors to what happens here? Sorry, I thought that I got disconnected. The Islamic Republic has pressured Iranian competitors in international sport games to forfeit their fight if they had to compete against an Israeli competitor. And one of the most recent examples is the competition that was supposed to take place between the world champion, the Israeli Sagi Muki, in the judoka, and his Iranian rival Saeed Moulai, who had at first to forfeit his fight, and later on when he decided to leave Iran and defect, the two had met. And we can see that, at least according to the headlines, they not only met, but they have become good friends and they keep in touch. So this perhaps gives us some kind of hope that a change is possible. I would like to thank you again for participating, for staying this far and listening to this presentation. Under the circumstances of the COVID-19, I wish you all good health and the best wishes, and please stay safe. Bye-bye.